daily ZenCast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you, friends, and welcome. Thank you for being here. So many different, tangential, interrelated pins pinned up on the corkboard. Please stand by if you do not know what that means. It gets over-explained throughout the course of this podcast. Just dive in, start jumping around, you'll get the hang of it. Welcome, folks. Whether you're new or a returning listener, I humbly thank you for listening. So, we have arrived at a very strange point in post-American history, in postmodernism, whatever you want to call it, in the post-Trumptopian era, as I've been calling it. Setting aside the continuing deep gratitude for having closed off and nipped in the bud a branch of potential timelines we could have lived through, had dear old Donnie stayed in office, which he did not, despite whatever wild and wacky claims about him secretly being the quote-unquote really real president all this time, which doesn't make any sense, because if he was, then why the witch hunt? What? We've come full circle and inside out. The Trumptopian movement has tied itself in the perfect knot of what the F were they thinking? Unless, of course, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, all of this has been part of some double-blind treadmill of argumentation, wedge issue, echo chamber, political ideology, tug of war, hashtag 2 wings, 1 bird, cornucopia of crazy, but pins on the corkboard, friends. Dive in. Since Reagan was in office, friends, I have been questioning and pondering and I would never dare use the word, quote, researching, because that requires you, going out into the field and testing things, testing hypotheses that you don't take for granted as default absolutely true, and not just relying on other people's claims and other people's claims that they have absolute proof without actually going into the field and verifying reality and facts on the ground. So many pins on the corkboard. Obviously, the back and forth, and I'm sort of jumping in on the middle. And by the way, friends, I want to be really clear to anyone who's like, who is this guy and from what perspective am I arguing at him about? Against his. I am neither on one side or the other, nor am I on the quote-unquote center/fence sitting, as I am sometimes irrationally accused. I am quite literally a transcendentalist. I am, as in that one poem about being beyond the ideology and the concepts and the constructs of this and that, in that othery place, I forget the name of the author and the name of the poem. Insert here, data files lost, items redacted. But pins on the corkboard. If you know which poem I'm talking about, shout it out in the comments, please. But you get the gist of where I'm going at, right? Like, there's so many interconnected things, so many plates juggling in the air, and it's like this tsunami of, well, we should have seen that coming. And, some people did. And some people did, but questioned it and wondered, is it real or is it hype-driven part of the echo chamber of wedge issue, treadmill, argumentation, echo chambering? I throw words around. It is curious to note just how, inside out and topsy-turvy and, back beyond where we started from, we've gotten. Because, as some of the vociferous online voices out there, especially amongst the crowd, that willingly, and I'm not using this disparagingly, I'm just pointing out that there's a group of people that will self-identify and proclaim themselves to be, quote, and I mean this while serious and no satire, no irony, just like, quote, conspiracy theory researchers, and the degree to which, whether or not they comply with the textbook's definition of real, actual academic level, fully annotated, sorry, I misused that word wrong. I mispronounced that word incorrectly. I did not misuse the word. I misspoke it. With a bibliography, how many of them actually have that? They didn't see it coming, all of them en masse, from the top to the bottom, like including whoever the real architects of this interesting 7-dimensional checkerboard move against the chess maneuver, against the established rules of 1-dimensional chess or 2-dimensional chess, to have announced, to have declared. Well, I also get it. I took some time to make my response episode here and on other platforms. Although I did my sort of knee-jerk, here's the funny thing I think about this, sort of usual shtick and or, song and dance over on my central or original Facebook page, my personal page, as it were, which I don't hype very much because I prefer to try to build up the Zeppo brand and direct people to the Zeppo pages first and let them discover my home page. But the weird irony is the way, okay, there's all kinds of arguments going on, but everyone pause. And, the check that must be considered first is, did you read the actual thing that they published? Whatever it's called, the ruling. There's a lot of people arguing who didn't actually ever acquire the official PDF from wherever blah, 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 .scotus.gov it's probably at. And admittedly, I can't claim to be one of them just yet, but it's on the to-do list, right? So my thoughts are preliminary and sort of rough around the edges and fully acknowledged. I'm just basing this. What I have read is the portions of the ruling and the dissent publications that have been presented on various news sources, including Fox News, because I try to rotate to try to see past the talking heads and any kind of spin being given and just try to get the source materials as they present them so I can compare and contrast and see what bits and how. And it's so true. And there's also point of order for anyone out there still saying, oh, this news versus that news. There's a whole third tier market of news that's about in a sort of less right-wingy, less icky feeling, less ethno-nationalist way. Like, hey, news, you got spin. Here's the two sides and the third bucket. And here's what the actual just data is, or the facts. Kind of marketplaces of alternate news apps and sources is already deeply in its second wave of evolution. So if you think all lost, well, I don't know. If you're cynical enough to think those are all part of the echo chamber, they might be, or they might eventually become. There's, a slippery slope of just arguing about this stuff for the sake of arguing about stuff in a tug of war of we're on a tug of war show kind of way. So reeling it back in, the conundrum I see is that as presented, as adjudicated by and admittedly they must be called, is this a terrible thing to say? Am I going to get in trouble for saying this? If the right is allergic to put it nicely, what they call, quote, activist judges and or activist SCOTUS justices, Supreme Court justices, then what are these folks? The ones particularly that Trump handpicked from a curated, pre-selected, who knows what else, list from, and this is all fact. This is not me making things up, and I'm not, the Heritage Foundation brags that they are, and have been, the bipartisan, agreed upon sort of curator of fine judges that should be considered in a sort of, it's all above board kind of way. But, you pair that with the obvious, everyone's starting to sing the awkward part out loud, including certain publications, which should be vocally dissected and discussed in public discourse. And a pin on the corkboard. There's too much media, right? And there's too many slants, and there's too many. I get it. But if we sort of try to adjust for all the noise and all the spin, as presented, as adjudicated, the decision does not only truly go out of its way to bend over backwards to try to help Donald Trump, the individual, who is not currently in office, very important, very relevant pin on the corkboard, which we will return to instantaneously here in this episode. But it also, whether they want to admit it or not, is worded as such as that it is self-betraying in its blatant hypocrisy. The lead narrative, the narrative that's coming, and it's not just the narrative; it's baked into the language chosen by the what is it called, the majority, the majority's opinion as written, that this immunity is so-called not absolute immunity because it is only, quote, presumptive immunity and can be challenged under the right conditions, blah, blah, blah. And one of the many stipulations is also, by the way, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't think too hard. You can't use any of the official evidence as evidence. But don't ask too many questions. And no, if it was done, it literally does go out of its way to, they won't notice that we've created a category of presidential behavior that can and might be considered. Do I have some kind of weird, creepy bug that just tried to kill me? Something just weird, buzzy noise in my ear, and it freaks me out. Please no, I don't need, especially not one of those nasty ones. Okay, I need. Sorry. Something just went and right into my ear canal, but hopefully it's not in my ear. Squishy, gross. Okay. Sidebar. I have an unhealthy respect for all creepy bugs. But it bugs me when they hitch a ride on me or get in my house and then get into my studio space. Precisely because of this. Please leave me alone. Let me work. Amen. Okay. It cannot be, there's no other way, no matter how you slice it, no matter how many talking points on their end about how it's fair and it is within the bounds of, what is it that everyone's tug of warring? The principles of the insert correct terminology here of the way our laws are supposed to work. The due course of law, the due process, it essentially really does as the most, and it's, quite interesting and telling that the majority dismissed the minority as being, quote, too emotional about it. So many interrelated pins on the corkboard that we can go on a tangent spiral out of control about right there as to the paradigms within those different justices and what may or may not be considered subtextual there. But I digress. These talking SCOTUS rulings are quite fascinating because it's a dialogue with history. And they wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tap dance their way into essentially saying, as long as it can be written off, described, and sold to, essentially us in the future, who are probably the ones that all get kicked up to in the usual process. By the way, that's what's going to happen with Trump's individual set of complaints and cases. They tried to seem impartial and kick it back down a notch to have it reviewed, which might turn out to be, an interesting backfire. Pins on the corkboard. Isn't it interesting how Trump's stuff always seems to backfire on him in a way that sort of never quite kicks him out of running, but also doesn't really ever help the Democrats much, but seems to diffuse the situation a bit, but then keeps everything rolling along. So that'll be an interesting, sub-series of events to track as we move forward, friends. But I digress. I want to keep this episode short and snappy. They have, no matter how to try to collapse all the distractions in my mind, no matter how you slice it. And I'm not trying to jump on the board because I know they've already used this language, but this was my initial thought the moment I had my eyes reading through, the inserts and the quotes and the bits from the ruling as presented on all the major media channels as I rotated through, including all the ones that I usually flip through. And it was like, she's not exaggerating. And because it all resides in the office, and although, despite the fact that they were obviously overreaching to help one particular individual during their turmoil of many court cases against them, which may or may not backfire in the lower courts, right back in their faces, and may or may not successfully be kicked back to a receptive and non-reformed, non-reconciled Supreme Court that would just perpetuate the cycle of delay and or dismissal of these cases. But conversely and quite curiously, and I shit you not, this is my first thought before anybody else said it, at least that I heard, right? That may or may not have been in real time after or before they actually said it, because I woke up at an odd hour and I was catching up to all of the day's news in the middle of the night. But I digress. All of the things, all of the immunity relative in its slippery and, as some people pointed out, so obtuse as to be dangerous, really dangerous, not just alarmingly dangerous. The moment you get somebody that's like, okay, well, I really can do anything that I want. Here's a bunch of weird, crazy stuff that seems good. And then I will just go do what tyrants do. Because that's a fact, right? The reality is that right now, the argument has been ruled by an activist set of majority unvetoable, apparently. I don't know how you counterbalance a judiciary that just gave itself more power that it always claimed it didn't want, on top of doing this thing they just did for Trump. But no matter how you slice it, by doing it for Trump, because it's all attached to the, hear me out now, office itself, they also did it for Biden. And it was immediately obvious to me before I heard anyone else say that. I'm taken to its extreme. And who knows what Biden may or may not do in the time remaining between now and whenever it gets weird. And and the juncture, we get to the pressure points of the traditional process of the quote-unquote peaceful turnover of power that this whole community of communities is sort of tied together around, because it is supposed to be that as opposed to any of the other crazy stuff, right? Can we agree on that, please? Pin on the corkboard. We discussed that in many ways throughout the episodes of this show. So there's not many ways to, what conclusions can we come with? I'm not trying to draw any half-baked ones just yet. I'm not thoroughly baked enough myself to get there. But I am hopefully opening the door to an interesting a fair, balanced, not playground bully-oriented public discourse here in the comment sections of either my Sprecher account or the official Facebook page for the show over there in Facebook land, which you can easily find by going to Facebook and typing in the Almost Daily ZenCast, or just ZenCast, or Almost Daily, or Mr. Zeppo. Should help you get there. All those combined, and bingo bango. Thank you for joining me, friends. I'm not judging one way or the other. I'm saying, I want to make sure that I don't forget the critical points that are the, beating hearts, the gooey, transcendental center of my entire argument. I'm not here, I've been accused of being a little bit of everything by all kinds of people throughout my entire life. And I've been trying to engage in the questioning and the thinking of and the fair, consensus-building oriented public discourse about our civic process and the absurdities that sometimes happen in it, and the current events around which our daily lives, are all interconnected by. Our lives don't need to revolve around them, but it is interesting to observe them and discuss, hey, how many of us are interested in, like, hopefully bringing the public, awareness to a certain orientation of consensus so we can push the needle in that direction, right? And for me, it is not, I'm in a coalition standing against this thing that Trump is currently the poster boy for, but that is got roots deeper than him, and that he's brought all kinds of wild and over-the-top distractionary, but sometimes also critically also dangerous in and of themselves, extra bells and whistles too. But that doesn't mean I'm automatically inherently the way some at the center of the Trumptopian movement can be seen to be about the immediate obvious opposition. And I've got my own concerns and questions and critiques. But so we are currently living in a post-turn of a potential, unless we very quickly close the door on what might be an unpredictable branch of probability waveform function driven what if new variable universes of what if the current person in office chose to show to those who just slow walked their way into granting him darn near temporary king-like powers that we jokey insert this as comedy. America could be in looking back in the future, and this is essentially when America, although ironically at first, but eventually all just became used to saying "Long live the temporary American king." There are so many things that the current president, whoever they may or may not have ended up being, or maybe in your universe here and now, in the realm of plausible, theoretical things that they could do, it's mind-boggling. Not the least of which are a series of actually reasonable, they wouldn't have needed the immunity protection clauses that were just sort of jerry-rigged into the system for theoretically Trump, but also retroactively because it's inherently built, and they didn't address that issue in any noticeable way that I caught. Now I'm due for a more thorough review of the actual ruling. So pins on the corkboard, friends, and let's circle back on some cool-headed discussion about this. I'm not here to fearmonger about what newly crowned King Joe Biden might do, but I have posted some funny suggestions, and I want to hear yours. And we do need to think about what the worst-case scenarios could realistically be, not the least of which from the individual that has described themselves as a dictator and a wannabe king on multiple occasions, whose bend-over-backwards blind faith followers have tried very hard to say, oh, but he was just kidding, but also, what if he wasn't? What if that was just all part of his riz? His charisma, for those of you who didn't know what riz was. His charisma, psychological manipulation, matrix tactics. But anyway, so many pins at the corkboard we must come back to. Friends, I humbly invite you to engage in the public discourse and to give yourself a self-guided tour of the cosmic, intergalactic, literary, action-adventure, fan-fiction, dystopian, future book series and many book series that I'm slowly engineering. I haven't even really started drafting major chunks yet. I have sample bits and chapter ideas, and a new layer of that sort of thing is dropping throughout the course of this summer as we bootstrap ourselves into doing it live on Wednesdays. Today is Tuesday. I'm going to try to dare myself to jump off that dive platform tomorrow. We stepped up to the edge last week, but didn't quite do it as, we did not actually jump off completely. But join me as we craft our way into a future that the purpose, I'm writing like a George Orwellian-esque, one could say inspired by 1984 to some degree, warning fictional novel of satire and critical thinking challenges to be like, hey, let's not vote for that future. Okay? The music you're currently listening to is created by me, myself, and I, and the wonderful people behind the various collection of musical engineering apps and noisemakers that I have collected over the time that I've been doing live streaming. It occasionally doesn't fly with the algorithms for some reason, so please forgive me if I try to reuse this audio content on other platforms and it causes weird temporary blockages or whatnot. Until next time, friends, I've been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. That's been DJ Zed, my imaginary sidekick, lifelong friend, music-making collaborator, personal valet, and best BFF forever from another dimension, exactly like, the hiccups and the burps came right at the best time. At the end, when I'm promoting the metaverse of projects. End of vocabulary files corruption. End of show. Terminate now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Zeppoverse. Please stand by. More content is coming. More content will be dropping immediately on multiple platforms. To orient yourself, please visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
Please note, that was satire. That was satire. Warning, warning, warning. This is a working MacGuffin in a project of literary, fictional, comedy, book series. Not to be taken too seriously, but also based on this author's and artist's actual real-world lack of vocabulary, insert fear here, reaction to real-world events and the outcomes they might trajectory create in the world you are living in now. Stay tuned for more. Be good humans to each other.